Hey guys, tonight we deliver you a compilation of some of the creepiest encounters to feature on the channel this year. An end-of-year compilation, if you will. So sit back, relax, and remember, fear lies within. I still remember this experience vividly, even though it happened to me back in 2006. At the time, I thought that was it. It was one of those moments where you think to yourself, is this actually happening? Am I going to get out of this? And it will be a moment that will always stick with me. I was traveling across the country alone. I'm a male, just for some background context to this encounter. I'd recently finished my studies and was taking some time out for myself. I'd always wanted to explore different parts of the country, so dedicated the summer to myself. To travel up and down the country and ticking some places I'd always wanted to visit off of my list. I had enough money to see me travel, money for food, drink and accommodation. And by that I mean cheap motels where I could get my head down, but not cost me too much. At the time I didn't have a car, so most of my traveling was done from buses, walking the odd few miles whilst hitching for a ride. And that's where I found myself when I just finished up in Utah. I was walking along as I looked to hitch a ride. I was looking to make my way to California, with a long list of places I wanted to explore there. I wasn't having much luck with getting a ride, with the majority of cars just passing me by. The more I walked, the later it was getting, before it was pretty much nightfall. Knowing if nobody stopped, I would have to walk until I found the next town or closest motel to get my head down, and try again the next day, with cars becoming fewer and further between. But as I was thinking this, I could see some more headlights coming down in the distance, as I tried my luck again. And to my excitement, the vehicle began to slow as it slowly went past me, coming to a stop. As I jogged over to the grey Ford truck, I made my way round to the passenger's side door. As I grabbed the handle, the door was locked. I couldn't get in. It was then the window slowly came down halfway. I couldn't fully see inside, but I heard the guy ask where I was heading in a friendly tone, telling him where I was looking to go and asking if he was heading in that direction. If he could take me as far as he was heading, I'd be grateful for the ride. Again, hearing the guy, he told me that was no problem and to jump in. The window then began to close. I heard the door lock unclick as I grabbed the handle and opened the door. As soon as I got in, the man took off as he drove down the road. I thanked him for giving me a ride. As I looked around and over to him, he was a middle-aged white male. His hood was up and he didn't look directly at me so I could see his full face. As we drove along, I tried to make conversation with him, but he wasn't the most talkative. And after our first initial interaction when I was outside of the car, his friendly demeanor had now changed. As I tried again with making conversation, he would proceed to just give one-word answers or be very vague in his response. After numerous attempts, I found myself falling silent, as neither of us spoke. He just looked dead ahead on the road, as I sat there feeling the awkwardness wash over me, thinking to myself, hey, at least I'm not walking. The journey would hopefully be quick. Not really knowing what to do with myself, I just sat there in silence. As I started to look around, it was then the man spoke, and what he said confused me.
"I can't do it again,"
he had said aloud. Even though I heard it, I asked him what he had said as I didn't understand what he meant by that. The man didn't reply. He didn't even look at me, he just kept his eyes on the road. I was now beginning to feel uncomfortable around this guy. Another awkward few minutes of silence passed before the man again spoke aloud, this time saying forcefully,
"I won't."
Weirded out, I asked, was everything okay? Won't what? Was he talking to me? What he was saying didn't make sense. It was then the man gritted his teeth as he began to sob angrily.
"He wants me to do it again, but I can't,"
he said. The uncomfortable feeling I had now turned into fear, as I regretted my decision to get a ride from this guy. He clearly had issues. We wanted him to do what? What the hell was he talking about? It was only us in the car. It was then he turned off the side of the road we were on and headed down a dirt track that appeared ahead, breaking off the main stretch of road. My pulse began to race as I asked where he was going. Why had he turned off? Wanting nothing more than to get out of the car, it was then the guy pulled over, coming to a stop as he turned and looked at me. As I grabbed at the handle, I heard the doors lock. My heart was racing as I said, "Look, please just let me out. I don't want any trouble. I'd like to walk, thank you." The man glared at me as he said those same words.
He wants me to do it, but I won't do it again.
Hearing the inner turmoil in his voice terrified me. What the fuck was he on about? Looking me dead in the eyes, the man then said, "You have one chance. Get out now and run." I could feel my nerves shaking as the man said this. I feared for my life, and at the moment the car doors unlocked, and without hesitation, I pushed open the door as fast as I could, falling to the ground beneath me. As I scrambled to my feet and began to run to distance myself as far away from that man as I could. Unable to help myself, looking back I saw him shouting to himself in the car as he turned the car around and drove off. I was left a shaking mess down that dirt road, not quite understanding what just happened, but knowing deep down and feeling it in my gut that I was lucky to have gotten out of that truck. That guy was nuts. I walked an age to the next nearest town from there, and didn't even bother hitchhiking again, sticking to other means of transport. I don't know what was wrong with that guy, but he clearly wasn't all there. I don't know if it was just some sick, demented game he played to scare me, but the way he was in the truck, his presence, his eyes, I know he meant what he said, and I know deep down he had some dark things. I do believe he was talking to himself, and contemplating doing something horrific to me. I reported what I could to the police, feeling it was only right, as that guy would have been a danger to others out there, like me just looking for a ride. But I couldn't give that much information, only a description of his truck and what he looked like. I didn't get his license plate. Since that night, hitchhiking was a no-go for me. And all these years later, I still remember that night often. I often think, where out there is that guy now? Or what he could have done since that night? Was I in the presence of evil that night? I consider myself lucky that I never found out. I was on the lookout for a new recliner chair. The current one I had is pretty worn and on its last legs, so wanting to get a new one, I thought I didn't really want to be paying out too much, and decided to browse Craigslist to see what I could find. I'd used Craigslist many times before. The marketplace wasn't new to me. I had bought items and sold items on the platform with no real issues. So when I began my search for a new recliner, I knew where to begin, and it didn't take me long to find a few options. As I browsed through the ads, I filtered through the ones that didn't really appeal to me. Some were tattered and the pictures didn't look great. But then after some digging, I found one that really caught my eye for a good price. It was black leather, and that would already match the sofa set I already had in the house. It was listed for a reasonable price, so not waiting around, I contacted the seller and inquired about viewing the item. When the seller answered, I said hello. There was a long pause, so much so I thought no one was there, and was about to put the phone down, when I then heard breathing down the phone, followed by a hoarse-voiced hello. I said, "Oh, hey, I saw your ad for the recliner on Craigslist and was interested in coming to see it." There was again a long pause, with just the sound of breathing, until finally the seller said, "Oh yeah, that thing. Sure. Well, it's at a storage unit currently. What I can do is get it out and load it onto my van and bring it your way. If you like it after seeing it, we can talk about a price and you can have it." I said to the man, "That's great, but not being keen on having him come here, I offered to go to the storage unit to view it myself." "The storage unit's a while away, so to save you the journey, I can collect it and bring it your way. It's no problem. And if you don't want the chair, don't worry. Don't feel inclined that you have to buy it." Hearing the seller say this, and alleviating the pressure of feeling I would have to buy it after he drove out of his way, I thought it would save me the journey, and he seemed like a reasonable guy, so I agreed, and we set a day and time, and I gave him the address. A few days later, on the day I was expecting the guy to arrive with the chair, I couldn't seem to get through to him when calling or texting to double check that he was still coming. I got no reply, and the phone seemed to ring out. It had gotten to the late afternoon, and after waiting the majority of the day, I assumed that was it, The guy wasn't coming and I'd wasted my time. As I was getting ready to head out, there was a knock at my door. I stopped what I was doing as I went and looked out the window. I could see a van parked out front at the bottom of my drive. As I went to the door and opened it, there was an older man standing in the door as he said, "Hey, I'm here with the chair." Surprised he'd come, I said how I had tried to get in touch with him and assumed he wasn't coming. He chuckled to himself as he looked at me and said he was sorry, but he had lost his phone. Luckily, he'd wrote the address down when we spoke the other day. He didn't want to hold me up any longer and the chair was in the back of the van if I wanted to come and check it out. Not wanting him to have wasted his journey and really wanting to get the chair, I said of course and was happy he'd actually turned up. As we reached the back of the van, he stopped me. As he said, sorry if the van smells a bit, he often uses the van when hunting and storing the animals. I didn't really need to know that, but thanks for the heads up, I thought. As he opened the van, I couldn't really smell anything that bad, which was good, and as he had the chair right at the front, it was easy to see. We looked it over and it was in mint condition. It was great. The seller lowered it out of the van as to get a better look and test it out. As I sat in it, it was comfy. The levers worked with no issues. I was sold. I said I'd take it, and a smile crept across the seller's face. He seemed just as happy to make the sale as I was buying it. I asked him if he would accept a little less than the asking price, as a part of the leather on the top shoulder was grazed. Expecting him to say no and stick to the asking price, he said he hadn't even noticed that, and sure, he would accept slightly lower. Wow, I thought. I had literally picked myself up a great deal. The seller helped me get it in the house before taking the money, thanking me for my time and leaving. After positioning my new purchase and rearranging a few things in the room to make it fit well, I headed out to meet my friend for the plans we had that night. Later that night we arrived back. My friend had come to mine and we were going to have a beer before he went home. As we walked into my house, I turned on the light and showed him my new chair in the front room, telling him to have a seat whilst I got the beers. As I was getting the beers, it was then my friend called me asking what the smell was in the room. I didn't know what he was talking about, so walking in with the beers I stepped in the room as I sniffed to smell what he was talking about. And sure enough, I too could smell an unpleasant stench that smelt like, to put it bluntly, shit. Now, I have a cat, so I naturally checked to see if they'd peed or crapped in the room anywhere, as cat crap stinks. But I couldn't find anything. I got some air freshener and sprayed it around the room to mask the smell until I could pinpoint what it was. We sat and had our beers as we discussed what we thought it was. My friend suggested I check if I had a leak anywhere from the bathroom, or see if a waste pipe was leaking, as the bathroom was directly above. It was late, and we had a few more beers before calling it a night. I said if it was the same tomorrow, I'd investigate further to see what it was. The next day I woke up, and getting myself ready, I walked downstairs, making myself a coffee. As I went to my front room, I was again hit with the same smell. But this time it was worse. Like it had settled overnight and filled the room. It smelt like a rotting animal. I couldn't understand where it was coming from. There was no leak. The smell wasn't coming from the pipe. It was then, as I searched the room, I thought, the smell only appeared since I got the recliner in here. As I leant into the recliner, examining it, the smell had to be coming from the chair. Then I remember the guy saying about his van and the animals he would keep in there. Had the smell seeped into the leather of the cushion of the chair? Could that be what it was? As I maneuvered the chair and extended it out, it was then I could see the bottom of the chair. Where the zip was, on the bottom of the chair, that led inside the base of the chair, the zip itself had a cable tie clamped to it. I thought that was strange straight away, so I headed to the kitchen, got some scissors and returned to cut it off. I lay down, cutting off the cable tie, as I placed it aside, my fingers grabbing the zip as I slowly pulled it across the opening of the base of the chair. As I opened it, the smell increased tenfold. It was coming from inside the chair. As I slowly reached in to see what the hell was inside, my hand was met with a hard, square object. As I pulled it out, it was a tattered box. I placed it on the floor as I sat next to it, my breathing becoming heavy as I tried to hold my breath. Whatever the smell was, it was coming from inside that box. My heart began to race as my hand slowly hovered over the lid. Did I want to see what was inside? I slowly pulled the top off the box and instantly heaved as I moved away from the box. What lay inside was a rotting pair of severed hands, placed together holding what seemed to be a decomposing heart. Instantly, I threw up from seeing what the smell was, my eyes watering. I couldn't believe my eyes. I called the police as I explained to them what I had found. What followed was myself being questioned, my living room cordoned off whilst everything was investigated. I explained to the police about purchasing the chair off a seller on Craigslist days prior. I couldn't give them much information on him, only a description of the seller and his van. I didn't even get his name. The post obviously gone, and no other post from the same person. His number non-existent, and I don't even know where he lived as he brought the chair to me. All the findings were bagged for evidence, and both them and the chair taken for examining. As far as I'm aware, this is still unsolved, and I have no idea who that man was, and if what was found in that chair was related to a crime that he had committed. I still have questions. Did he know it was there or forget? Was his intention to have this found someday? I just don't know. It still shocks me today what I found, and just the situation I found myself in from buying a chair. I've heard my fair share of crazy stories, but I never thought I'd have one quite like this myself. It's a rare thing to happen, but I still don't buy off Craigslist anymore. Camping is a passion of mine. I love the outdoors, I love exploring in nature, and I enjoy spending time away from the hectic schedule of city life. But when it comes to camping, I've never quite had an experience like the one I had in 2022, and I don't care to have another experience like that again. A friend and I were taking one of our annual camping trips. We would always make time each year to go camping together and explore new places. We both shared the same interests and enjoyed getting away together. We're from Scotland and had decided to take the trip over to Northern Ireland and branch out in some new territory to explore a forest we had never been to before. The journey was simple, a quick ferry trip over to Belfast, and then the second part of our journey heading to the forest. After completing our journey and finally arriving at our destination, it was amazing to see the vast chambers of forest that lay before us. On the way to it, we were taken in by the views. The country really does have some beautiful, picturesque scenery, and having then arrived at our destination, we headed into the forest hoping to see more of the wonders of nature. We had set out on our journey early that day, and we were keen to find ourselves a good spot deep enough inside where we could set up shop for the night. Having finally settled on a spot and pitched our tents, setting our campsite up, we were ready to have a drink and some food, and regain some energy after a long day. As the night began to take shape, we set up our fire and sat talking of what we planned to do in the coming days. As we sat there, it was then we heard the faint sound of footsteps in the distance. As we looked in the direction we heard them coming from, my friend grabbed my arm as he pointed over in the distance to what seemed to be the silhouette of someone standing in the tree lining. As we both sat there, surprised at seeing someone out here at this time, albeit it could have been another camper, it was still creepy to see the outline of someone just standing there. My friend decided to call out addressing the figure, but there was no response. Grabbing our torch, I stood up and walked over, aiming the light at the figure as to get a better look at who it was. But as I brought light to the area with the torch, there was no one there. No person, no figure, and no sound of footsteps to suggest there was even someone there, and they had moved. Thinking what the hell, we looked around the immediate area, but couldn't see a sign of anyone. Laughing to ourselves, we thought we were obviously tired and we'd had a few drinks, maybe we were just seeing things. The sound could have easily been the sound of an animal passing by, and the silhouette could have been the way the shadows feel amongst the trees. Feeling that was enough for one night, we decided to head to bed and get some sleep for a fresh start the next day. But our sleep didn't last long. Not long after we had headed inside, we were both woken to the unnerving, high-pitched scream that filtered through our campsite. We both shot out of our tents, looking at each other. The sound disappeared, and as our thoughts raced at what the hell it could have been, Another sound invaded our campsite. This time, a sound that set our pulses racing. The noise sent shivers down our spines. It came out of nowhere, and it was fucking creepy. It sounded like someone talking in whispers and a hissing sound. We couldn't see anything or anyone. From at first, the sound being in the distance, to it getting what seemed closer and louder to where we were, it began to freak us out. It felt as if someone or something was watching us, like we were not as alone as we thought we were. As we looked into the distance of the tree lining, in all directions, it was like whoever it was all around us. As we looked at each other questioning what the fuck it was, the sound suddenly stopped, like it disappeared or we were hearing things. All we could hear now was the sound of the tree branches swaying in the wind. My friend, eager to figure out what it was, grabbed the torch as he stood up, pointing it into the tree lining, lighting up the black abyss to the sight of nothing more than the bark of the trees. Feeling calmer, he stood as he said we should check the area to see what the hell that was, or if we were being watched. I told him I didn't fancy straying into the forest in hopes of finding the noise that had literally just scared the shit out of us. But as we debated, I saw his logic. We needed to know if we're not alone, or if someone was watching us. Slowly, we walked over to the tree lining, listening out to see if we could hear the eerie noise again. As my friend led the way, he asked me if I had my knife. I didn't. I'd left it in my bag. So quickly running back, I retrieved my hunting knife, before heading back towards my friend. But as I did, I stopped in my tracks. As I saw my friend in the distance, facing back in my direction, as he shone his light back in my direction. Only as he stood there, he was as white as a sheet, and his eyes filled with worry. I called out, asking if he was okay. But he just stood there, staring at something. As I slowly approached him, I asked him again what was wrong, but all he did was nod, as in ushering me to look. As I turned to look at what had caught his attention, I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I turned and saw the unnerving sight of symbols carved into the bark of the trees. As the light moved from tree to tree, we could clearly see there were symbols marked on the trees all around where we had set up camp. Coming from the other direction that day we hadn't noticed. The symbols looked like witchcraft, something sinister, as we found ourselves studying what surrounded us. I looked at my friend, and he didn't need to say anything. I could see it in his eyes. Let's get the fuck out of here. As we went to move back to our tent, the sound of whistling traveled through the air. And at that moment, my friend screamed out loud as he jumped back in horror. My heart racing, I asked him, "What is it?" He ran towards the tent, and what he said to me scared the crap out of me. He said he felt someone breathing on his neck and as if someone had touched him. I could feel it too. The feeling of the area sent an uncomfortable wave of anxiety through me. It felt like we were not alone. Something was with us. And with that, we rapidly packed up what we could and got the fuck out of there. All the while looking back, fearing something was around us. When we were finally away from that dark place, we instantly felt better. Like the atmosphere around us felt different. After that night, we researched symbols. Satanic, cult-like, witchcraft, you name it. And we know for a fact there was something sinister about those symbols on the trees. I didn't really have any thoughts or belief in that stuff before that night, but seeing what I did and feeling that presence around me that night, I fully believed there was something malevolent in that forest. And that area we found ourselves in was definitely cursed. You don't know what crazy things go on in the woods, and that trip definitely put me off camping for a while. This encounter happened to me when I was on a camping trip in the Seneca Forest, and has stuck with me ever since as one of the scariest nights of my life. Camping and hunting are favourite pastimes of mine. I love exploring and adventuring new places, and when planning this trip, I decided on making a long weekend of it, and I was looking at somewhere I hadn't been before. So that's when I decided to try out camping out of state in West Virginia, where I'd heard good things about its national parks. I had never been there before, but knew it was a vast space of nature and wilderness that you could get lost in and forget about the world. On the day of our trip, I set out early. I was really looking forward to getting out there and exploring and being one with the nature. Having reached my destination, it was beautiful, just as I expected. But without taking you through my full day's trip and boring you with my exploring, I'll fast forward to the first night. I had set up camp and had settled in nicely. There's something peaceful about being alone in nature with your own thoughts. After having dinner and a few drinks, having been tired from the day's hiking, I got myself settled in my tent for the night, and as I lay there, I slowly began to drift off. But my peaceful slumber didn't last long. I woke up to a sound that startled me, and as I sat up listening out for what the noise was, it disappeared into the silence of the night. Awake now from the noise that woke me, I thought it must have been the sound of an animal of some sort in the distance. Ready to roll over and try to get back to sleep, it was then I heard it again. This time, closer, and this time unlike before, I was fully awake and realized it was a weird sound, something I'd never heard before in my life. It's what I would describe as a wailing sound, like if someone was crying out, but unlike in any tone I had heard before. As I sat in my tent, thinking to myself what the fuck was that, it didn't sound like a deer, no wolf or even no bear that I'd ever heard before. As my thoughts raced, I could hear the sound of shuffling outside my campsite, and the sound then got closer and closer, until it was right outside the tent. I could hear the sound of distorted breathing, and something moved around outside. The fear building inside me as I sat in the tent, my mind racing thinking what it could be. The feeling of the unknown in that situation is horrible. Knowing something is on the other side of your tent, but you can't see it, is such a terrifying feeling. And at the time I was too scared to move and attempt to open the tent to see what it was. Trying to remain silent and not move, hoping whatever it was would just pass. I sat there, holding my breath, as the shadow of whatever it was retreated, and the sound of shuffling got further and further away. After sitting there for what seemed like an age, I finally mustered up the strength to move and unzip the tent to look out, believing whatever it was now gone, and it was safe to do so. I peered my head out, looking around at the dark, empty, moonlit campsite. Relieved to see nothing was there. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped out, wanting to make sure the coast was clear. Shining the light around the campsite, I could see nothing out of the ordinary, until the light fell upon something that sent an uncomfortable feeling through my body. Shining the light down, I saw to my shock and confusion an unrecognizable footprint, but I couldn't work out what animal would leave that behind. It was long and stretched, with 4 wide, pointed, finger-like claws. Fumbling for my phone to get a picture, just as I was about to get my camera, it was that moment I heard the shuffling again in the near distance. Shining the light in the direction of the sound towards the trees lining, it was then the overwhelming sensation of fear coursed through my body as I briefly lit up a set of glowing eyes watching me. As soon as the light hit the area, they vanished behind a tree. But what lay grasping the bark of the tree was the sight of a greying, long, bony-fingered hand as it rested sprawled on the tree. Froze to the spot, I could feel my heart beating in my throat. Not knowing what the hell it was, but knowing that something was watching me, I didn't know what to do. I slowly backed up to my tent, searching aimlessly for my rifle and keys, not taking my eyes off of whatever it was. As my hand finally reached my rifle, it was then I saw the hand slide up the tree, as an eye peered out from behind. This time, a good 8 foot higher than it was originally. As it slowly moved from the shadows of the tree, revealing itself, every part of my body began to shake with fear, as I couldn't really comprehend what I was seeing. A tall, skinny-to-the-bone creature, with antlers and unusually long limbs, standing on its hind back legs as it pierced the silence with its haunting wail again. Terrified and awestruck with what I was seeing, it was as if a bolt of adrenaline was injected into me as I finally broke my trance, firing my rifle towards whatever this terrifying thing was. It moved back behind the trees. And at this moment, wasting no more time and fearing for my life, I ran the opposite direction. Running as fast as I could, I gripped my rifle as tight as possible. As I looked back to see, to my horror, the sight of the haunting eyes of that thing following behind me. In the distance, my legs went to jelly. But I couldn't stop. I had to get out of there, and away from whatever pursued me, my keys rattling as I ran for my life, turning back every few seconds to see the shadow still lurking in the distance behind me, as if it's stalking me. I finally reached my truck as I threw myself inside, looking back one more time to see again the haunting silhouette of what stalked me, just standing in the distance, watching my every move. I put my foot on the gas and hightailed it out of there, never looking back. I didn't stop that night until I was back in town, getting myself a cheap motel room. I couldn't sleep after what I saw. The adrenaline was still racing through my body, along with my mind racing with all kinds of crazy thoughts in my head. What was that thing? If I hadn't have heard it and got the hell out of there, what would it have done to me? All kinds of things. I have never seen anything like that in my life before, and can 100% say it was not any species that I've seen before. I fully believe that night I crossed paths with a skinwalker. Being alone in the forest, I don't know why it revealed itself to me. Maybe I'd been too close for comfort to where it dwelled, and maybe it was warning me. I've never been so scared as I was that night, to know there are things out there that really exist. If you believe it or not, it's a terrifying thought either way. I've not been back to that place since, and now when I go camping, I never camp alone. I had been using online dating apps for years. It's where I've had most of my luck when it comes to dating, to be honest. But with using these apps and meeting people offline, one such encounter scared the crap out of me. I use dating apps for casual flings. I'm a 26-year-old male, so apps like Tinder and Bumble were addictive to me. I'd met a lot of women off of these apps, but last year, in August 2023, I stumbled across a beautiful woman called Kerry that caught my eye. I swiped right and was excited to see that it was a match. I messaged some typical opening line to get the conversation going, and it wasn't long until I got a response. After a few messages back and forth, getting to know each other, we swapped numbers, and then, to my surprise, it wasn't long before Kerry asked if I would be up for meeting. I was, of course, more than happy to do so, and asked where she fancied meeting. She explained that she wasn't one for going out to bars and suggested I came to hers where we could keep it cheap, get a few drinks and some food and really get to know each other if I was down for that. I was surprised how she was so keen and open about meeting and inviting me to hers, but of course I said yes out of excitement. We arranged the day and time, and she sent me her address with a cheeky wink face, saying she couldn't wait to meet me in person. The night arrived, where I readied myself and made my way to Kerry's house. It wasn't far from where I lived, just on the other side of town, but as I drove to her location, the area was in a run-down part of town. I slowly drove down the street, looking for the address as I pulled up outside. I looked up the house and all the lights were off, like nobody was home. I texted Kerry, telling her I was outside. It was then that the porch light flicked on and I got a reply, saying great and to make my way up and that she could see me outside. I looked up and saw the curtain pulled back. I could see her in the window. I got out my car and made my way over to the door. As I walked up to the porch, the front door creaked open as Kerry smiled as she invited me in. It was actually her from her pictures, which made me feel instantly better as we all know how many catfish are out there. As I walked in, she shut the door behind us, pointing me to the front room as she offered me a drink. I told her I had bought some wine for us. She said she already had a bottle open in the kitchen, so she would put mine aside for after. She told me to make myself at home as she went to the kitchen to pour the drinks. I sat on the sofa as I looked around the room. It was pretty messy. There was a distinct smell of cigarettes lingering and a tray full of cigarettes end sprawled across the table and ashtray. As I began to observe the room, I noticed there was men's boots and a man's bomber jacket lying next to the chair in the room. As I continued to look around the room, it was then I heard a creak from above and what sounded like some footsteps from the ceiling above me. I began to think to myself, were we not alone? Did she live with someone? As Kerry came back into the room carrying 2 glasses of wine, she placed them on the table next to us as she sat on the sofa next to me, smiling. As she slid a glass towards me, she began to ask me how I was and started small chit-chat. As I responded, I heard the creak above again, which I couldn't ignore as I asked her if someone else was here or if she lived with anyone. Looking surprised at the question, she replied no, that we were alone and she didn't live with anybody. She then reached for a control on the coffee table as she turned some music on, as if to cover up any noise. She ushered me to have a sip of my wine as she sat back, eagerly watching me. I don't know what it was, but something didn't feel right. I began to get this uncomfortable feeling. I began to make small talk, asking her how long she'd lived here as I grabbed the glass of wine. I held it as she watched me, giving vague answers as she said, "Oh, since forever." I again put my wine down as I asked her where the bathroom was, and that I needed to pop to the bathroom if she didn't mind. Her face had an expression of annoyance spread across it as she pointed out into the hallway, saying it was just down back past the stairs. I smiled as I got up, my mind racing as I walked into the hallway towards the bathroom. As I looked back, she was standing, watching me. As I walked past the stairs, I couldn't help but slightly glance up, and as I did, I could have swore I saw a figure move out of sight at the top of the stairs. That uncomfortable feeling I had grew tenfold. As I entered the bathroom, I shut the door as I tried to reason with myself that I was overthinking things and there wasn't anyone upstairs, and Kerry hadn't drugged the wine. I looked around the bathroom, and again I could see signs of more than one person living here. 2 toothbrushes, men's shower gel. I looked out the window as I washed my hands, really regretting my decision to come to the house. As I went to open the bathroom door, my hand hovered over the doorknob. As I stopped in my tracks, I could hear talking. I slowly pressed my ear to the door, trying to get a better listen. I could hear what seemed to be Kerry whispering. I couldn't make out exactly what was being said, so I slowly cracked open the door. To my regret, I gritted my teeth, trying to be silent. The door typically creaked. As I peered out, I could see Kerry standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up as she spoke to someone. I then heard another deep voice from up the stairs. A male voice, as it said, "Don't fuck this up." My heart began to race as I slowly pulled the door to. There was someone up there and they clearly had bad intentions for me. Beginning to panic, I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to get the hell out of there. So I made my way back over to the window as I opened it up, luckily with ease, and luckily it was big enough to get through. As I was halfway through the window, there was a knock on the door. I hurriedly dropped myself down from the window as I ran around the side of the house back to my car. As I reached my car door, I looked back, and my heart raced as I saw a figure of someone in the upstairs window staring down at me. The front door began to open as Kerry stood in the doorway, an incensed look on her face. I threw myself in my car and got the fuck out of there. I couldn't get out of there fast enough, and when I finally got home and managed to calm myself, I went to block Kerry online, but her profile had already been deleted. I had no messages from her and blocked that number straight away. Looking back on it, I'm so glad I trusted my gut instinct. There was someone upstairs, and I don't know what theirs and Kerry's true intentions were, but what I do know is they weren't good. She wanted me to drink that drink, and I fully believe it was drugged. I'm lucky I got out of there when I did, and I'm thankful that I never had to find out who was upstairs and what they had planned for me. Be careful out there, and when meeting people online, don't meet them at a private location like their home upon the first meeting. This encounter happened to me a few years back. I'd never found myself in a situation like it before, and it's one I don't care to experience again. I'd finished up work late one night. I'd ended up staying back to get some of the tasks complete that I was behind on, as at the time I felt the pressure of getting them done. I didn't drive at the time, so the commute to work was either the bus or train. With finishing so late that night, and wanting the quickest way home, I didn't have the patience to wait for the next bus, knowing that at the time it was, they would be running few and far between. So checking the schedule, I saw that I was in luck, and there was one final train heading my route that I could catch. Pushing it for time, I didn't have long to get to the station. Luckily, my place of work wasn't overly far from the station, so what started out as a light jog turned into a full-on sprint, trying to beat time and make it to the platform before the train arrived. When I finally arrived at the station, I was relieved that I'd made it to the station before the last train had come in. Otherwise, it would have been an expensive ride home. Having purchased my ticket online, I took a seat on the platform waiting for the train. The platform was peaceful at this time of night, quiet and empty. I sat on my phone as I scrolled through Instagram, waiting for the train. I began to hear the sound of a train nearby as it made its way to the station. Looking up, I could see it was coming from the opposite direction, so it wasn't my train. The train slowed on its approach as it pulled into the station. As I looked over, it looked empty. Not many late-night commuters, which would probably be the same for my train. It soon kicked back into high gear again as it made its way out of the station and on with its journey. As the train exited the station, I got back to scrolling through my phone. It was then I had to take a second glance over to the other platform, as something caught my eye. The platform was no longer empty, but what sat across from me on the opposite platform was someone dressed as a clown. As I looked over, I noticed this person was staring right at me. I remember thinking, what the fuck? Where did they come from? Did they get off that train? As I didn't recall even seeing anyone on that train to get off. And I'm pretty sure I'd have noticed someone dressed as a clown. Or did they happen to enter the platform as the train was leaving the station? Either way, it was weird that this person was now sat directly opposite me, staring and smiling at me. I didn't know where to look. I stared back for a second before breaking eye contact and looking back to my phone, thinking that was weird. As I tried to occupy myself and wait for my train, but I couldn't help but look back up. As I looked back over, the clown was now standing as they walked towards the stairs, still staring at me, before turning and walking back inside and out of sight. Strange, I thought, as I began to think. Maybe they had indeed got off their train and had taken a seat before leaving. I don't know, but either way, seeing a clown at that time of night on an empty station platform was both unexpected and creepy. My train was due at that point anyway, so I'd be home soon enough. After sending a text, I checked the time on my phone and looked up to see if the train was in sight. But instead of my eyes being met with the sight of my train rolling into the station, my stomach filled with dread, as they were instead met with the sight of the clown. The clown was now sat on the bench over from me, on the same platform, on the same side I was sitting on. Sitting again, staring at me. Instead of leaving, they must have walked across the overpass and come to this platform. An uncomfortable feeling washed over me. I didn't know what to do, so I stared back at the clown as my pulse began to race, trying to act calm and unmoved, even though I was freaked out by this point. In as steady a voice as I could and with irritation, I said, "Can I help you with something?" The clown, unmoved, didn't respond. All the while they continued to stare at me as their smile grew, their eyes not even blinking. I didn't know what the hell was going on and what was up with this person, or if it was some kind of stupid prank they were playing. I said they weren't funny, and finally I could hear the sound of my train coming in the distance, its lights approaching the platform. I grabbed my bag and stood up, looking back at the clown, who was now staring at me with a stern, emotionless face. The train screeched into the station as the doors opened to empty carts. I stepped on. Looking back, I saw the clown still sitting there. I sat down watching them as they didn't move. I thought to myself, finally, I would be out of there and away from that freak. And just as I'd begun to think that, the doors began to close. But not before the clown darted up and jumped onto the adjoining cart, next to the cart I was in. Are you fucking kidding me? I thought as the train began to move from the station. I turned, sitting and facing forward. I only had a few stops to go. I couldn't relax as much as I tried, knowing they were in the other cart. I turned looking, but couldn't see any sign of them through the window. I sat back forward as we reached the first stop. Looking around, no one else got on the train, and looking to see if the clown got off, it looked as though they didn't. The train in motion again on course to its next stop. It was then a shiver crawled down my spine, as I heard the sound of laughter in my cart coming from behind me. As I slowly turned, I could now see the clown, sitting a few seats behind, staring at me as it pointed in my direction. What the hell was this person's problem? Becoming concerned and freaked out, I didn't want to pay them any attention. So I looked forward, grabbing my things tight, knowing my stop was next. As my train hurtled through a tunnel, the light from the cart dimmed before returning to normal as we passed through. I was almost at my stop. But it was then I heard a shuffling from the seat behind me. As I slowly turned, it was then I saw the eye of the clown peering at me through the gap in the seats right behind me. My heart raced as I stood up. This freak was getting closer and closer. I shouted for them to fuck off. As I stood next to the doors waiting for my stop, the clown stood as I'd said this. They froze, staring at me, the smile fading from their face. The train slowly came to a stop. But in that moment, as we both stood there staring at each other, I genuinely felt for my safety. I didn't want to take my eyes off of them. The doors finally opening, I backed onto the platform and headed for the exit. The clown standing like a statue as it watched me. I turned, picking up my pace as I finally heard the train begin to leave the station. I walked through the underpass, wanting nothing more than to get home. In that moment, I'll never forget what happened next. The sound of running footsteps echoed from behind me. Turning my head, I was met with the haunting sight of the clown running at me. Their eyes enraged as they sprinted towards me. The blood in my veins turned to ice as the adrenaline, like an injection of energy, sent me into overdrive as I sprinted for my life towards the exit. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back as I ascended the stairs, breaking into the street. Now, being back on the street and away from the station entrance, I finally built up the courage to turn around, and I was surprised to be met with an empty stairway. The clown was nowhere in sight. I looked around, panting heavily as I composed myself, catching my breath. I didn't understand where they had gone. Maybe they turned back, heading towards the platform. All I did know was, whoever that person was unhinged and scared the shit out of me. Just relieved they were gone, I wasted no time getting the hell out of there and back home as quickly as I could. I've never been scared like that before. Whoever that was, there was clearly something wrong with them. A sick prank or whatever they wanted to call it. It terrified me. It was literally like being chased by the clown from It. That's what it reminded me of. Now, I never get the last train home. I finish at a reasonable time, and if I have work left over, it can wait. You never know what type of people are out there. So, to that freak dressed as a clown, let's not meet again. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching to the end. Here at Horror Motives, we're wishing you a happy new year. And don't worry, there's plenty to come in 2025. As always guys, if you liked this video, please like and share it, as it really helps us out. And comment what you would like to see coming in the new year. If you're new here, or haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more horror content, and become a part of the Horror Motives community. We really appreciate it. Have a great new year everyone, and remember, fear lies within.